Now, let's see. Soda, soda, and soda. And my dear Stan, what will you have?
I don't want any.
Oh, General, don't be a piker.
All right, I'll have a banana split.
Hello, and welcome to episode 37, part 2 of the Laurel and Hardy podcast. I'm your host, Patrick Vasey, the editor of the Laurel and Hardy magazine and the author of the long-anticipated book, Laurel and Hardy Silence. And today, as our canoe is upturned, we take a deep dive into Laurel and Hardy's third talking picture, the wonderful Men of War. A little later in the show, I'll be joined by one of our regular expert guests. Yes, here to row me round and round in circles is classic comedy historian and author Glenn Mitchell. So we'll begin our look at the film in just a minute or two. Before that, I'd like to officially welcome some newly signed up patrons of the podcast. As I mentioned before, I like to keep this podcast ad-free, so my patrons are my sponsors, and it's thanks to your support that I'm able to A, keep the podcast going, and B, avoid the need for annoying interruptions of unwanted adverts. So a huge thanks for subscribing to one of the two tiers of membership goes to Edward Watts, David Thornburg, Rob Farr, Paul Hunt, Josh Sheffield, Paul Scott, Brad Eastridge, and Greg Taylor. Thank you so much, guys, for becoming patrons of the show and for your lovely messages of support that you've been sending me. It's so gratifying to hear how much you enjoy the show and how much the podcast means to you. All patrons get complete access to all the special exclusive podcasts published only on patreon.com, including the new premium series that I've been posting, in which I pull some of the wonderful contemporary articles from the archives, the latest of which was posted about a week ago on the 15th of October, where we looked at a lovely article interviewing Stan and Babe from October 1929 entitled Two Prize Idiots. You too could gain instant access to this ever-growing library of special exclusive bonus episodes. I think there's around 20 extra episodes on there now, with lots more to come. In other news, earlier this month I was thrilled to receive a copy of Andreas Baum and Michael Errett's new book, Laurel and Hardy, A True Love Story. Now this is a massive book, beautifully designed, very, very high quality, and it's a pictorial history of Stan and Ollie, their life and work, and it really is crammed with visual treasures galore, many images that have never been seen before, and accompanied with a DVD of rare unpublished film footage of the boys too. There are several essays in the book written by guest authors, familiar names to listeners of the podcast, such as Randy Skretvet, Chris Sagan, and Craig Kalman, and there's also one in there by yours truly. Details about the book, Laurel and Hardy, A True Love Story, can be found by visiting the author's website, which is thepictorialhistory.com, or just by clicking the link in this episode's show notes will take you right there. So that's all that. It's now time to go for a walk in the park. I can see you were looking anxiously around for something, and I think I've just found your underwear. Today's film in focus is Men of War. It was filmed May 7th to May 15th, 1929, released June 29th, 1929. Produced by Hal Roach, directed by Lewis R. Foster, photographed by George Stevens and Jack Roach. The main supporting cast: Anne Cornwall, Gloria Greer, James Finlayson, Charlie Hall, Harry Bernard and Baldwin Cook. By the spring of 1929, the distribution of Hal Roach's comedies had been exclusively handled by MGM for the past 2 years. The aftermath following the split from their previous distributor, Pathé Exchange, was far from over, however. On April 30th, 1929, the Los Angeles Times, as well as several other newspapers and trade papers, broke the story that Hal Roach had filed a lawsuit against Pathé. Quote, "Damages of $1,866,000 are asked in a suit filed yesterday in Superior Court by the Hal Roach Studios Incorporated against the Pathé Exchange Incorporated. The The suit is based principally on the charge that the Pathé Exchange was guilty of unfair discrimination in the distribution of films from the Roach Studios. The complaint also asserts that the defendant distributed other films to the detriment of the Roach Pictures and embarrassed the Roach Studios financially by asserted failure to make timely accountings of receipts from the release of Roach Pictures. The plaintiff further charges officials of the defendant corporation made statements about their contract for the distribution of films that were designed to hamper and injure the Roach Studios. End quote. Clearly, Roach was not happy with the way Pathé had conducted itself and strongly believed that the distributor had severely and intentionally hampered the success of his comedies. The suit rumbled on for the next couple of years as Pathé countersued Roach, and eventually they settled out of court in April 1931. Whether or not there was any validity to Roach's initial claims is open to debate, but it could be argued that even with Pathé in charge of distributing his comedies, the growing popularity and success of a particular pair of his comedians toiling in the All-Star series had gone rather well. Granted, the films Stan and Babe made during the Pathé era were nothing like Laurel and Hardy comedies, with the obvious exceptions of Do Detectives Think and possibly Duck Soup, but the stars' trajectories grew undeniably ever closer during Pathé's watch. Very shortly after Roach and Pathé began to lock horns, the studio began production on Laurel and Hardy's third all-talking picture, whilst at the same time, the team's initial attempt, Unaccustomed as We Are, was being released to theatres. Finally, fans, theatre audiences and critics alike could all look, listen and sit in judgment of Stan and Ollie's voices and their reinvented comedies. Would they be successful? Would their fans accept the comedians' voices? Speaking to the contemporary trade press around this time, one of the men credited with having in large part created and developed the Laurel and Hardy team and their particular brand of comedy, commented on the impact that talking pictures could potentially have on comedians. Quote, "Introduction of sound to the field of light comedy has added a new element upon which the future success or failure of many prominent comedians will depend, is the opinion of Leo McCary, comedy director and a former Hal Roach executive. That a number of comical stage comedians, McCary points out, have been failures in silent pictures indicates the great degree to which their voices aided them in putting over their humour. If then the voice is so important in spoken comedy presentation, poor or drab voices of the screen comedians, which detract from their otherwise comical performances, may prove the stumbling block upon which they will fall to oblivion," he says. End quote. And that was in the Film Daily, June 4th, 1929. With regard to the mystery of what an artist's voice sounded like, talking pictures immediately rendered the audience's imaginations redundant. Auditory expectations were now either to be met with relief and celebration, or devastatingly bring many fans' love affairs with their favourite actors to an abrupt end. For Stan and Babe, the nervous wait for how their vocal talents would be received from the established admirers was finally over. Principal photography on Stan and Ollie's third talkie, initially titled Sailor's Holiday, began just 3 days after Unaccustomed as We Are received its domestic release. Pleasingly, affirming reviews immediately began to trickle in as the public lapped up the first offering. The shadows of Messrs. Laurel, Hardy, Kennedy, Bush and Todd danced around the screens, and for the first time their voices filled the air of auditoriums, first around the country and then around the globe. And the world laughed. It was likely then with a fresh air of positivity and renewed optimism that Stan and Babe donned their brilliant white sailor suits and headed out on location to begin making what would prove to be another timeless comedy. What's more, their crew were now a lot more experienced. The Laurel and Hardy unit had quickly learned what worked and what didn't, what suited the team's comedy, and made their transition to talkies appear seamless. Unaccustomed as We Are perhaps understandably began with a heavy focus on dialogue, but as the film progresses into the second reel, one can see the reliance on speech begin to fade as the action returns to mostly visual humour. In their second talkie, Birthmarks, there was an obvious swing back to their mostly physical comedy formula, with just enough dialogue to keep the plot, such as there was, moving. Their third film, finally titled Men of War, saw a third pivot. This time, the action had the ideal blend of both visual and spoken comedy. The studio's tentative first step into the talkies began with a film completely restricted to the controlled environment of Roach's sound stages, whilst the second bravely ventured beyond the studio's walls for a small number of scenes. Men of War, on the other hand, was filmed almost entirely on location at the visually appealing Hollenbeck Park, situated approximately 13 miles from the Culver City lot. In his autobiography, Charlie Chaplin famously claimed to have told his producer, Mack Sennett, quote, "All I need to make a comedy is a park, a policeman, and a pretty girl." End quote. Whether consciously or subconsciously, in making Men of War, the Laurel and Hardy unit had followed Chaplin's formula to the letter. With one slight amendment, they doubled the number of girls. With its charming bandstand, tree-lined pathways, and picturesque bridges spanning a beautiful boating lake, Hollenbeck Park was a well-known and popular filming location, particularly for 1 and 2 reel comedies. Chaplin himself filmed his trysting place there in 1914, and the following year, Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle used the location in both Fatty's Chance Acquaintance and Fatty's Tintype Tangle. Other notable comedians that made use of the location before Stan and Babe included Roach's own Snub Pollard in All Lit Up, 1920, and Harold Lloyd, Haunted Spooks, 1920, and again in Girl Shy, 1924. Directing the action in Men of War for the 6th and last picture in a row with Stan and Babe was Louis R. Foster. The remainder of Foster's 6 shorts with the boys consisted of Double Whoopee, Bacon Grabbers, Angora Love, Unaccustomed as We Are, and Birthmarks, spanning what was one of the most challenging periods in the team's history. His efforts eased the boys from their comfort zone of silent pictures into the unexplored new world of the talkies. Lou Foster was a real success story at the studio, having climbed the career ladder starting as an apprentice labourer in 1921 and ultimately working his way to the role of director. After Men of War, he directed just one more picture for Roach, Harry Langdon's studio debut, Hotter Than Hot, featuring Thelma Todd. He departed the Lot of Fun to direct feature films for several other studios, and in 1940 Foster was awarded the Academy Award for Best Writing for the film Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. He wouldn't be the only member of this burgeoning Laurel and Hardy unit to cut his teeth with Stan and Ollie before going on to greater success elsewhere. Now, Stan and Ollie as sailors on shore leave looking for fun was not a new concept. Although it had been done the year before in Two Tars, Louis Foster stated in an interview with Richard W. Band during the early 1970s that Men of War was not intended to be a strict remake, as so many early talkies were. It's fair to say that the basic outline was identical. 2 mariners, Stan and Ollie, hook up with a couple of girls, and together they cause chaos. On this particular occasion, they begin by strolling through a sunny park and spot a couple of young giggling ladies played by Anne Cornwall and Gloria Greer, and the boys decide to try a spot of wooing. This was Anne Cornwall and Gloria Greer's first and only appearances with either Laurel or Hardy. Anne Cornwall's most notable screen role up to this point was in the role of Buster Keaton's girlfriend in the 1927 feature College. Despite being in the business for around 40 years, these 2 pictures were arguably her only real movie highlights. Gloria Greer graduated from the musical comedy stage, but sadly her life and movie career were both very short, the latter consisting mostly of some uncredited work in a handful of Hal Roach pictures and a minor role as a honeymooner in a 1930 RKO short called Moonlight and Monkey Business. Tragically, 2 years after appearing with Stan and Babe and less than a week after giving birth to her first child, Gloria Greer died at the age of 23 from an infection sustained during childbirth. Despite this being their only picture with Stan and Babe, their contribution to Men of War remains an important and enjoyable part of the comedy. The structure of Men of War followed the same format as many of their silent pictures, being split into 3 acts. 1. The park. The boys meet the girls and engage in an unintentionally risque conversation at cross purposes. 2. The soda fountain. The boys attempt to impress the girls by buying a round of 4 drinks, but they only have enough money for 3. And 3, the boating lake. The plucky sailors take the girls out onto the lake in a rowboat and chaotically sink every boat on the water. The first gag of Men of War involves the boys and the girls talking at cross purposes. Following a short session of childishly coy exchanges of waving and smiling, Stan and Ollie find a large pair of white bloomers that had fallen from a laundry basket right where the girls had been standing. Much to their amusement, the boys immediately assume the underwear must have slipped off one of the girls, and Ollie sniggers,
They fall down.
As Ollie is holding the undies aloft, a cyclist, played by Pete Gordon, comes riding past them and, without taking his eyes from them for a moment, knowingly laughs,
Naughty, naughty. Naughty, naughty.
before plunging headfirst, bicycle and all, into the boating lake. At this moment there is audible laughter and a few screams from the people boating on the lake, but the variation in sound quality gives the impression that the majority of reaction is from members of the public who were gathered behind the cameras watching the filming. This kind of occurrence was becoming increasingly common for production units, especially with popular screen stars such as Laurel and Hardy. As filmmakers became confident and competent at recording in busy public places, it became immediately clear that the free and easy days of location filming, as experienced during the era of silent pictures, had ended. Assembled crowds of spectators needed to be managed carefully, or their presence would, at the very least, become an unwanted part of the movie and would most certainly hinder the production, causing unplanned delays, forcing countless retakes, and ultimately costing the producers more money. A Hal Roach production unit in a public park would have been conspicuous and easily drawn attention, with several cameras, tripods, lights, and now the added spectacle of Elmer Regis' long-reaching microphone booms fitted atop the newly kitted-out bright red sound truck. Several behind-the-scenes stills exist from the making of Men of War, one showing a grassy bank full of onlookers, watching in fascination as Stan talks through a lakeside scene with Anne Cornwall and Gloria Greer, with Babe Hardy and Lewis Foster waiting patiently. An article in the contemporary movie magazine The Picture Goer illustrated this point. Quote, Once, when they were working in a park near Los Angeles, a neighbouring school dismissed classes so that the children might watch their favourites at work. In a horde, the youngsters descended upon and surrounded Laurel and Hardy. Be funny, please do something funny, demanded 1,000 young voices. The clowns obeyed. For half an hour, they gave up work and amused the children. End quote. Anne Cornwall becomes distressed after realising that she's lost her white gloves. Jumping to the wrong conclusion, the valiant sailors approach and delicately inquire whether the ladies have lost anything. There then follows a very funny conversation at cross purposes where the ladies are talking about gloves and the boys are talking about underwear. The boys' glances and childish sniggers at each other are delightful as the girls describe the lost item.
They're white. Very odd. They button on the side. Yeah, I hated to lose them. They were so easy to pull on.
I'll bet you miss them.
Well, you can just about imagine how I feel without them.
It's a good thing it's warm weather, isn't it?
And I just cleaned them with gasoline, too.
The dialogue here is accomplished and uses innocent double entendre, which wouldn't have been possible in the silent era. As Stan and Ollie argue over who should hand over the underwear, the gag's climax comes as a cop, played by Harry Bernard, approaches the girls, reveals that he's found the missing gloves, and returns them to their relieved owner. Narrowly avoiding complete embarrassment, the newly acquainted friends all agree to visit the soda fountain together and walk off arm in arm. The film's second act is the only scene in the film shot on a Roach Studio soundstage and is a blatant and shameless remake of a scene from the team's golf-themed silent comedy from the previous year, Should Married Men Go Home? Unquestionably improved by the addition of dialogue, this sequence in Men of War is arguably one of the most famous in the boys' entire canon. Inspired by a 1912 vaudeville sketch by comedians Weber and Fields, the sailors want to impress their dates by buying a round of 4 sodas. But they only have 15 cents between them, just enough for 3 drinks. Ollie hatches a foolproof plan in which Stan is offered but must refuse a drink, thus keeping up appearances. Of course, every time Ollie asks, Stan becomes confused, forgets the ruse, and orders a soda. The fun here is all in Ollie's incredulous frustration and the thinning patience of the soda jerk played by James Finlayson in his first role with Stan and Babe since Big Business. Ollie must repeatedly cancel the order and take his friend to one side to re-explain the plan.
Can't you grasp the situation? You must refuse.
But you keep asking me.
I'm only putting it on for the girls.
Oh.
And we've only got 15 cents.
Eventually Stan understands and proudly refuses to have a drink. However, following Anne Cornwall's exclamation,
Oh, General, don't be a piker.
Stan submits once again and orders a banana split. Acknowledging he's on a hiding to nothing, Ollie tells Stan that they can discreetly share a soda. Stan is told to quickly drink his half first, but downs the whole glassful in one go. Once Ollie realises, he calmly asks,
Do you know what you've done?
To which Stan can only nod in shameful acknowledgement.
What made you do it?
I couldn't help it.
Why?
My half was on the bottom.
The significance of the clever use of dialogue and interaction between the two here cannot be underestimated, and it set the tone for a particular character trait that Stan adopted and the team developed over the rest of their career together, namely his confusion caused by language itself. This would become one of the team's richest sources of gag material going forward, and many of the standout moments in their film canon are based around Stan's unique understanding, or perhaps misunderstanding, of language. Another reason this scene is so important is that it is the first time James Finlayson's voice is heard on film. Here, his soft Scottish brogue begins very gently taking the soda orders.
And what flavour, please?
Cherry.
Oh, cherry, yes. And you?
Chocolate.
Chocolate? Mm-hmm. And yours?
Sassafras.
Until the ridiculousness of the situation forces his timeless, trademark outburst. The final act is straight-up pantomime and would have worked just as well in one of the team's silent comedies. The sailors hire a boat and attempt to row the girls out onto the lake. Ironically, they have no clue how to row and quickly begin arguing and fighting with each other. Their altercation quickly involves passing rower Charlie Hall, and we hear his first words of recorded dialogue too.
What are you trying to do, you big sap?
Oh!
Bumping into my boat. Dumbbell.
Cushions are thrown, boats are upturned, and all their occupants are systematically dunked in the water. As in all the reciprocal destruction endings, this scene escalates to reach its finale. The film ends with all the displaced rowers, including another familiar face, Baldwin Cook, one by one clambering on board Stan and Ollie's boat. Inevitably, the boat can no longer remain afloat under the weight of the assembled combatants, and it sinks as the film fades to black. Men of War possibly deserves a better ending. Up to this point, the picture is arguably one of the team's best, and this type of finale had been done to death through the boys' silent years. In addition, this latest incarnation is perhaps not as effective as its predecessors, most likely as a result of all the best ideas already having been done before, added to the limitations of being on the water. The official Hal Roach Studios press book gives an interesting description of the final sequences. Quote, 3 times did Stan Laurel and Oliver Hardy submit to a thorough drenching during the filming of their newest laughfest, Men o' War. In the final scene of the picture, the 2 Hal Roach MGM comedy clowns submerged themselves and their companions in the waters of a park lake in a grand finale of capsized canoes and struggling swimmers. The sound effects of the first 2 takes of the scene were ruined by the laughter and applause of hordes of onlookers on the banks of the lake. The third and last shot of the scene was made in the early morning hours before a crowd had gathered to watch the antics of the comedians. With the exception of one scene, the interior of a soft drink emporium, Men o' War was filmed and recorded outside the studio. The sound recording apparatus mounted on a truck followed the movement of the comedians. Microphones on long booms swung over the water of a small park lake to catch the noise of all the splashing players and the voices of the actors. End quote. As one might expect, Men o' War was a huge hit with audiences and critics with almost unanimous approval. Quote, Stan Laurel and Oliver Hardy continue their speciality of infectious gags in Men o' War, their latest picture. Laurel and Hardy are reported to be unique in the amusement world. They have a talent for extracting great drafts of comedy out of such humorous situations as usually are considered only good for one laugh. They proceed on the theory that irritation is infectious, which seems reasonable enough. Thus they assume that when one citizen irritates an unsuspecting citizen, that gentleman in turn will oblige by irritating another, just out of the robust spirit of the camaraderie. In Men o' War, the contagion asserts itself in the form of capsizing canoes and rowboats in Central Park on a beautiful Sunday afternoon. By the time the last craft is docked, the concessions director is on the verge of calling out the state militia. End quote. And that was in the San Francisco Examiner, September 8th, 1929. And the following reviews are from various publications. First one, Men o' War was acclaimed by the weekend crowds as the funniest comedy these 2 comedians have made to date. The next one, a Laurel and Hardy comedy called Men o' War utilised some of these comedians' earlier tricks with the added advantage of the voice. The boat scene is new, however, and hilarious. Several awkward pauses in the comedy tend to throw suspicion of a censors meddling. Several Vitaphone vaudeville acts and a talkie news complete the bill. The next one, a real good talking comedy will get a laugh a minute. Recording excellent. Then we have howling good comedy, but recording only fair. The next one, if there ever was a good talking comedy, this is it. Our people are talking about it yet and asking for more. Recording on disc, good. And the last one, this is fair. Not as good as other comedies of these boys. So the sunny weather and relaxed atmosphere created by the Hollenbeck Park setting and the happy-go-lucky performances of Stan and Babe and Anne and Gloria provide Men o' War with a warm and enjoyable air. Their frolic in the park was wonderful. In fact, one could almost describe it as the perfect day. For Stan and Ollie, however, that day was still to come. With us again today for our discussion on the classic short Men o' War is film historian and author of the wonderful encyclopedias on Laurel and Hardy, Charlie Chaplin and the Marx Brothers, as well as the A to Z of silent film comedy. It's our good friend Glenn Mitchell, so welcome back to the Laurel and Hardy podcast, Glenn.
Good to be here.
It's great to have you, great to have you. Obviously, we should have had you for our discussion on birthmarks, but as it was, we've moved on to Men o' War, so I think you've probably got the best out of 2 films there, without a doubt.
Oh, easily, yeah. There are those who are convinced that I contrived the escape. He got COVID on purpose. He went out and went out and inhaled close to obviously infected people, so as not to talk about birthmarks.
Well, we had a great. I got to thank you again for introducing me to Richard Roberts. We had a great chat. Never met Richard before, so that was really nice to have a new guest on and to get a new perspective, certainly on birthmark. So I really enjoyed that. So thank you for that.
I'm really pleased it worked out.
Oh, it did. Yeah, absolutely. So the last time you were on, I was just looking back, Glenn, it was, interestingly, Double Whoopee, which was Lewis R. Foster's first film with Laurel and Hardy. And here we are, Men of War, his sixth and last film with the boys.
Yes, that was the end of his association, after which he left Roach, went off to work for Larry Dharma, making, frankly, rather cheap shorts for RKO with, oddly enough, Max Davidson, himself an ex-Roach person.
Yes, of course. Did he make one more with Roach? He made the Harry Langdon, Hotter Than Hot, I think he did, which was just after, I think, Men of War, wasn't it? But yeah, then he disappeared.
Yeah, there's another link, by the way. We'll come to this later. A connection between Men of War and the Roach Langdons. There is a connection.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, all right, interesting. Dangling a carrot, I like it. Okay, so let's take our little deep dive. Deep being the operative word for this one. Men of War. What's your initial take on Men of War, Glenn?
Well, simply that it was their best talkie to date, the third one, and an enormous improvement really on the first two. Despite my seeming antipathy towards birthmarks, it isn't that terrible, but Men of War is just so much better.
Yeah.
It still hasn't got it right yet. If you compare it to the next one, Perfect Day, you can see that they're still struggling a bit with the pacing and particularly the editing.
Yes.
There's really too much in the way of cutaways, especially to James Finlayson.
Yeah.
They hadn't got the idea that you don't need to keep coming back. So the editing is still fairly clumsy, and it's as if they'd forgotten a lot of the pacing of the editing of the silence, which they really didn't need to jettison all that much.
Yeah.
So
certainly not for that last scene. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's more of an issue here than it is, frankly, in the first two, and certainly it was much improved by the next one. So why the editing on this is so messy, I really don't know.
Yeah.
But that's the only really serious flaw in Men of War, apart from some few obvious technical problems like camera noise getting in sometimes in the soda scenes.
Yeah, interesting you say about noise. I was rewatching it just before we came on, and I have these new headphones which pick up a lot of noise. They're very good headphones, and I was watching the scenes, particularly in the boats at the end, and there's a real kind of background rumble going on. It's almost like road noise. I can only describe it as and as you say, there's lots of cutaways to Finlayson which are silent. It's a very controlled little cutaway, and then back to this noise, and then silent again. So that really amplifies that sort of messy editing process as you were describing.
Yeah, there are all sorts of little things like that too. In the earlier scenes, you get ambient background park sounds, and if you cut to a close up, that all stops suddenly. Then they just
that's right.
Yeah, then they cut back to the mid shot, long shot, and the background sound resumes. And there was no reason even to cut the track at that point. They could have just let it continue to run under the cutaway, and that seemed not to have occurred to anyone. But the cutaways to Finlayson, yes, all of the background mayhem from the lake stops because it's obviously not happening really. Well, he's doing these reaction shots quite separately, but.
That's right.
So I've lost myself a bit here, but this was an example of the rudimentary editing in audio terms as well as in picture.
Absolutely. But at least, I suppose a nice place to start is this is the first time that we get to hear Finlayson's voice.
And what flavour, please?
Cherry.
Oh, cherry, yes. And you?
Chocolate.
Chocolate? Mm-hmm. And yours?
Sassafras.
As well as Charlie Hall.
What are you trying to do, you big sap? Oh! Bumping into my boat. Dumbbell.
Baldwin Cook.
Who threw that cushion?
He did.
Oh, I did not. Well, somebody did. He did.
And Harry Bernard.
I beg your pardon. Did either one of you ladies lose anything?
Yes, I lost a pair of gloves.
Yeah, and here's the thing. This is the official audio debut of Finlayson. But,
yes, of course.
Yeah, but here's the thing. Was he doing it in silence? Can we lip read it anywhere? Because only when I was making notes for this, I really thought about this, and it hadn't occurred to me that Finlayson might just have easily been going, for silence without us knowing it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you could imagine it in big business at the door or something. Yeah, definitely. That's worth a look, actually.
Yeah, and I think he probably was going gold, just wasn't being picked up by anything.
I bet he was. I bet he was. Yeah. That's great. So, yeah, talking of supporting actors, the two ladies involved, Anne Cornwall and Gloria Greer.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting thing with those two because they're only outing Laurel and Hardy, and Anne Cornwall actually gets billing on the main title. She's billed along with James Finlayson.
Oh, I just love soldiers.
Gloria Greer doesn't get billed. No, nobody else gets billed, but Anne Cornwall gets billing. Now, she'd been in films since about 1918 and made a fair number, but the only one that ever gets talked about now is the one she did with Buster Keaton, College, which, by the way, Charlie Hall is also in.
Oh, is he?
Yeah, rather less prominently. You see him, as a rower, and but yeah, she that was the only film of hers apart from Men of War that people talk about, and then she's one of those who really didn't do much later on, although she was always doing bits, and in one of those rather circular tales, having her other well-known films with Buster Keaton, where did she turn up in the 50s, but in the Buster Keaton Story.
Yes, that's right. Yes, of course.
So, yeah, so nice circularity to that. And But Gloria Greer, sad story, really, because she was obviously one who had showed some promise. She was with Roach during 1928 among the various bathing beauty types, and I'm hard put to say whether you can see her in that role in any other Roach comedies. I've had a look, I haven't really spotted her. She was a bit of a type that didn't really stand out, and but this was her only talkie role at Hal Roach, and her only other sound film was something, again, we're back to RKO again. She was in a talkie short called Moonlight and Monkey Business, directed by Mark Sandrich, long before he moved on to things like the Astaire Rogers musicals and Reno Wolsey and so on. And it's got some other ex-Roach people in it, Edgar Kennedy, Monty Collins, Billy Bletcher. There's also a British comedian, Phil Dunham, who was from Educational. And, Henry Armetta, who was in lots of films as an excitable Italian, including Friday Avalo, of course.
Right.
But lots of other things. A lot of people remember him from the Marx Brothers, The Big Store. But anyway, one of many, two of many. But and that was really it for Gloria Greer. And it was 1930. She married the same year. And about a year later, gave birth to a son, and there were complications, and she died of sepsis. It was an awful business. She was 23 years old.
Yeah.
And were it not for Men of War, she would be completely forgotten.
That's very true. Yeah, very true. And I always thought that she only had a very small handful of lines in the film, but she was sort of the less irritating of the two. Anne Cornwall was quite funny, but in a bit of an irritating kind of way.
Oh yes, absolutely. I just love soldiers. Okay, she's meant to be a bubblehead, but
yes, that's it. Yeah,
there's only so much of that you can listen to in a two-reeler, really.
That's right. Yeah, I've lost my gloves. Bless her.
Did you ladies lose anything?
Yes, I did. Just a moment ago.
Could you describe them?
Oh, sure. They're white. Very odd. They button on the side. Yeah, I hated to lose them. They were so easy to pull on.
I'll bet you miss them.
Well, you can just about imagine how I feel without them.
It's a good thing it's warm weather, isn't it?
And I just cleaned them with gasoline, too.
Oh, that whole business, of course. Laurel and Hardy find a pair of bloomers lost from a laundry basket. Like you do. It happens every day.
Yeah.
And in a public park, what else would you expect to happen? And why this laundry basket was being carried through a public park remains unexplained as well. But anyway, pair of bloomers. And she, of course, has lost her gloves, and the inevitable confusion results. And it seems, it's just mildly risque and a bit of a giggle. But can you imagine what would have happened if they'd tried to pull that gag 5 years later, once the production code had kicked in?
Yeah.
Can you
Yeah,
imagine
exactly.
anything like that in an American
Yeah.
film from mid 34 onwards? It would just be unthinkable.
Yeah, it wouldn't happen. Yeah, yeah. I love. I've got to say, I love that scene. I think it's. I love the interaction between Stan and Babe, especially when they sort of looking sniggered at each other. When they find it really funny.
Yes.
I love that. I mean, that I guess it's not for some people, but I think it's great. I've wanted to ask you actually about, and you may well side with me. I don't know whether it's sort of a British sense of humour type of thing. I don't know, but the sort of double entendre joke. We saw it in Angora Love briefly with the sailor walking past in the background.
Yeah.
And then we have pretty much all of That's My Wife is based on that kind of thing. Liberty a little bit, I guess, as well with with the changing the trousers. And then here again in Men No War. I mean, I just love those bits in the Laurel and Hardy films. How do you feel about them, Glenn?
Oh, I laugh. I'm British. We find knickers funny. That's simple. Lost drawers are hilarious to the British.
Yeah, just the word knickers is great, isn't it?
It is, yeah. It does sound, and of course in America that doesn't mean the same thing. It means knickerbockers.
Of course.
Yeah, these +4 type things. But no, women's undies. Jokes about women's undies. British men find them funny. I rather suspect our respective wives would not.
No,
no.
heavens no. Well, neither do I, in fact. Let's on the record.
Okay. All right. I have to carry the can. I have to be the one to put his hand up and say, all right, I find it funny. I do. But I do. We have a risque sense of humour in a way that's often misunderstood in continental Europe. This was something I found out about really, partly in conversation, apart from what I've read, but yes, there is an element of risque humour on the continent, but it's not quite the same as ours. I think they regard us as being emotionally underdeveloped, really, a bit immature.
Yeah.
Mainland Europe takes sex very seriously.
Yeah.
And we don't really. We find it the subject to snicker at. And whether that means it's a more or less healthy attitude, I'm not qualified to say.
Yes.
But that's how it is.
Yes.
And Laurel and Hardy, yeah, as you were saying, actually have a surprising amount of risque humour in their films, at least the earlier ones.
Yeah.
Rather more than the received image. People have this idea that they're just innocent, childlike, and many think unsophisticated, which they're not. But there wouldn't be anything near the knuckle in any of their pictures. Well, yes, there is.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the further back you go, the more there is. And
Yes.
silent comedy was full of it, particularly in the 20s. And as the 20s went on, there was an extraordinary amount of very risque humour going on. At Roach in particular, but Sennett too. The Billy Bevan films, for example, of the 20s, plenty of that there. And elsewhere. But yeah, as regards me, I find it funny. I do remember, I don't know if I should tell this story, but when Men of War first turned up on TV in Britain in 1972, I was still at school, and my interest in Laurel and Hardy was known. And the following day, somebody said to me, "Oh, I saw that Laurel and Hardy on telly last night," and he was talking as if it was my personal responsibility, merely because I was interested. I was known to be interested. It was as if I'd made it and I'd put it on TV. Like, oh, I thought it was pathetic. So I felt like saying, well, not my fault, is it really? But
you're clearly the ambassador for Laurel and Hardy. We'll go in to see Mr. Mitchell.
Yeah. Well, that's how it felt. And I said, well, okay, all right, but look, you have to make allowances for it. It's a very early talk. In 1929, they were having difficulties technically. They were to relearn everything as they went along. They were limited by what they could do, technical terms, and it's all very difficult. But it's not what I meant. And he would not be drawn as to why he thought it was pathetic.
Okay.
And it took me years after the event for the penny to drop. It was the Bloomers joke.
Yeah.
He'd have this moral downer on this Bloomers joke. And
That's great, isn't it?
Yeah. But at the time, to me, it seemed ridiculous that anybody would take offence at that. It just seemed such a very lightweight thing. at a silly
Yeah,
thing.
but there are those, as you say, there are those people, and it's not to say that they're wrong, but they have this very strong moral compass that is not acceptable. And I also see this in some of the reviews for Habeas Corpus, I think it was, with the jokes in the graveyard. How can you make jokes in a graveyard? This is unspeakable. I mean, it's probably small town America that the reviews came from, but I'm sure there's just as likely to be people in the UK that did exactly the same. But yeah, it's interesting that. I think it's great, and I think because the fact that we perceive Stan and Ollie to be so innocent. That's what makes it all the more funny, though, isn't it? That's where the jokes come alive. I think
that contrast.
It's not supposed to be risque. Yeah.
Yeah, there is that contrast, and so the macabre aspect you mentioned, Habeas Corpus. There's a lot of very macabre humour in their films. I mean, think of it. Fra Diavolo again, hanging, all this sort of
yes.
Yeah. And again in the same area, going bye-bye, the rather blunt line about aren't you going to hang him? This is pretty dark stuff.
Yes, actually, it's funny. I had a conversation once with I think it was Greg Taylor, one of the guys that listens, and we were talking about this sort of the subjects that come up in Laurel and Hardy films, just generally. I mean, this is sort of going off Men of War slightly, but they were never afraid to tackle quite deep subjects, deep dark subjects. If you looked at the sort of the child abuse in Pack Up Your Troubles,
yeah,
all that kind of and when you start looking at these different things, these themes, poverty and homelessness and all kinds of things, it's Stan and Ollie did not shy away from tackling those subjects.
Exactly. Taken seriously, like the child abuse thing in Pack Up Your Troubles, or taken lightly, like the idea of Stan having lost a leg in Blockheads.
Yes.
I mean that, knows how many poor guys were amputees as a result of the First War.
Yeah.
That was, and as of 1938, you'd have still seen plenty of them around. It was the reality of the times.
Yeah, it's a good point, that is, yeah.
Yeah, but that was a very, very dark joke.
Why didn't you tell me you had 2 legs?
Well, you didn't ask me.
Get in the car.
Well, I've always had them. I don't know.
You are better now.
Yeah. But somehow, but the extraordinary thing is that they made it acceptable. There was something about them that made that acceptable. If somebody else had tried to pull that off, it wouldn't have worked.
I think it's the lack of sort of cynicism, isn't it, in their comedy? Their comedy is very, I don't want to say innocent, because it's not necessarily innocent, but it feels as if it's coming from a decent place.
It's good-hearted. It's good-hearted comedy.
Yes, absolutely, yeah. It's the intent behind it, isn't it? It's not picking fun at people like that.
No, they're not trying to make fun, and but they're just seeing this was really a gag based on misunderstanding. It's not about the mutilation; it's about the misunderstanding. Yes, absolutely, and I guess also misunderstanding is a huge part of Stan and Babe's comedy, especially. And now that we have talkies, language is very much where Stan gets a lot of his confusion, and that's what the whole sort of soda gag is based upon, isn't it? It's that sort of playing with words, playing with dialogue. And yes, I think Stan his humour really comes alive with that.
Can't you grasp the situation? You must refuse.
But you keep asking me.
I'm only putting it on for the girls.
Oh.
And we've only got 15 cents. That's it. Now, come on. Now, let's see.
Soda, and just soda, and my dear Stan, what will you have?
I don't want any.
Oh, General, don't be a piker.
All right, I'll have a banana split.
No, pardon me, just a moment. Don't do that.
Just playing together. 3 sodas.
We can split ours.
Yeah, and it's part of the variety tradition. I mean, that routine itself was an old U.S. vaudeville routine that Weber and Fields had done.
That's right. Yes. Yeah. 1912, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah,
1912.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. I picked it. That's actually on YouTube. If you, I think it was recorded in the late 30s, possibly, because they kept that routine, from 1912 throughout. But it's interesting to listen to that snippet, that little scene. Yeah, there's a lot in there which is very, very much lifted.
Now, what are you going to have?
Oh, I don't care for anything.
Oh, go on, take something.
I don't care for anything.
Take something small.
Well, I take a small bottle.
What? A small bottle? With my 5 cents, you're going to take a small bottle?
Well, what do you want to coax me for?
I wasn't coaxing you. I was only making a bluff.
Oh, well, I don't take any bluffs.
Well, Mike, listen. 5 cents is all the money what I got.
All right, then why don't you say, what are you going to have and don't have it?
I'll say anything I like. And all you say is, ooh, I don't care for it.
Yes.
Now we'll commence again.
All right.
What are you going to have?
Oh, I don't care for anything.
Oh, go on, take something.
Well, I take a cigar.
A cigar? With my 5 cents a cigar? Remember,
What?
you don't drink, you don't smoke, and you don't eat.
I must be a dead one.
Never mind what you are. Now, this time we're going in.
Yeah.
Now, remember, no matter how much I coax you, all you say is, ooh, I don't care for it.
Ooh, I don't care
for it.
Ooh, I don't care.
Well, I'm glad to see you, boys. And what are you going to have?
How are you, Mr. Barton?
How are you, boys?
Pretty good.
What do you have?
Wait till I ask my friend. Mike, what do you want?
Ooh, I take a glass of beer.
Wait, Mr. Barton, wait. I want to find out and see if my friend knew what he was saying. He doesn't know. Just, Mike, but we practiced outside, don't you remember that? Now, what are you going to have?
I take a glass of beer.
All right, and what are you going to have?
Ooh, I don't care for anything.
Thinking of the variety musical tradition, it reminds me of something. This is a small tangent, but thinking about this recently, Laurel and Hardy in white naval uniform, and also the cry routine during the soda routine. Of course, another example of how the pacing's wrong, because they really milk that. It goes on far, far longer than it would normally do, Stan crying, and he gets into this profound weeping as well.
Yes.
Abject, to a degree that he would not normally do.
Do you know what you've done? What made you do it?
I couldn't help it.
Why?
My half was on the bottom.
Give me a check. That's all right, Stan. I'm not a bit mad. It's your party, and I'm going to let you pay the check.
You're not mad at me?
Not a bit. Come, ladies.
But here we had Stan in a Navy uniform doing the crying routine. Now, fairly recently, I spotted something of interest. This is during one of those Kennington Bioscope silent film events. You know about my involvement with that.
Yeah.
And we had a very interesting thing. Came from a friend of ours, Chris Bird, who finds all manner of film rarities wonderful. And he'd found us a fragment of a 1915 Lubin comedy with Billy Reeves, who was another Fred Carno comedian. Right. And he was, when Chaplin became the big thing, the various studios wanted to find their own Chaplin, and the logical thing to do was hunt for other Carno comics, and Lubin went for Billy Reeves.
Right.
And this film, Billy joins the Navy, and I hadn't seen the clip before the show started, because it had been supplied by a friend of ours, and it was during the screening, and I was looking up at this and thinking, oh, Billy Reeves was doing the Laurel cry.
Ah, interesting.
Yeah, the full facial pull.
Right.
And I've never seen anybody else do it, at least not that early. And I thought, well, okay, this is something that entered the Laurel repertoire, okay. I can only assume it's another thing that had come from Carno.
Carno, yeah. Well, so what year was that film?
1915.
Wow, okay.
Yeah. So, you know, a lot of us, with good reason, thought this was something that Stan had developed over the years. Didn't like doing it, as we know.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
I think it was another example of the Fred Karno bag tricks.
Yeah, very likely, isn't it? Yeah, very likely.
Yeah. So
That's interesting. Yeah,
so anyway,
interesting.
that's enough of that tangent.
No, it's good. I love tangents. We'll go on as many tangents as we can. It's always good. It's always good. But it's connected. It's connected. There's no problem with that.
Well, yeah, I thought it was relevant. I hope so.
So, yeah, so we're talking about the soda scene. And interestingly, that is the only scene filmed in a soundstage.
Yes, yes. I'm hard put to say whether it was the same one they knocked up for the equivalent scene in Should Married Men Go Home. I suspect that didn't last very long.
No, no.
That one we know was directed opposite the main studio building.
That's right, yes, the admin building, yeah.
Yeah, whereas this one looks different. The surrounds are different. And,
yes.
And of course, we've got those stills that show them outside with Findus and some other customers. Some say that's from a deleted scene. I'm not sure. I think they look just more like a pose scene because some of the gesturing going on about, the hand gesture about so many orders seems to me to be duplicating what they do indoors.
Yes, yeah.
So makes me think it's more likely these are pose shots rather than an outtake. But the people there are quite interesting. In the stills, you can see that the people sitting outside are pretty much the same people as we see within the film itself. You can see through the windows, and you can recognise Clara Gill.
Oh yeah,
yeah. And at left, there's Rolf Sedan. There's another guy. In the film itself, sitting opposite Clara Gill with his back most of the camera is Balbin Cook.
Right.
So he's supposed to be with her then. Out on the lake, he's in a canoe with a completely different girl who I take to be Betty Denko.
Right.
So he switched girls between the soda scene and the big boat fight later on.
Well, we won't go into that.
But we're obviously not supposed to notice this.
Yes.
Sensible people don't bother themselves with this.
Yeah.
Got too much time in your hands, and you're studying a film to talk about it for a podcast. Then you spot this kind of thing.
That's it. Oh, that's good. That's good. What impresses me, I guess, is they were very brave, I think, to go outdoors for so long at such an early talkie.
Oh, yeah.
And the logistics involved, because I think we've now got the boom mic coming in, swinging across the lake to pick up the sounds and the dialogue. And obviously we've got Elmer Regis's sound truck as well, which I think the boom mic was mounted on top of. I think it says that in the press sheet. It was mounted on top of the sound van.
Yeah, and I think there's at least one still where you can see them on location and the boom mic's in shot. And I think
is it? Yes.
I think you see where it's coming from.
Yeah.
So yeah.
There's some great stills, aren't there, behind the scenes of that film, actually. Some really interesting, where you can see all the onlookers on the grassy bank behind them. And on the bridges and different things. Yeah, really fascinating.
Yeah, and also you can hear them a lot of the time in the film. You're not supposed
to. That's
right.
right.
I do wonder how much of a problem it really was, or how much was in the press sheet that was really just publicity puffing about, extraneous noise and so on. But
yeah, that's right. That's right. I mean, it's very clear because so one of the stories was about all the school children being dismissed so they can go and watch their heroes, and I think the Picture Goer magazine talked about Stan and Babe entertaining them for half an hour. They stopped filming and they just looked after these kids, and then one of the stills says all those children all around them as well. So there's probably some truth in it, I would think.
I believe the number of children, certainly.
Yeah, that's right. They were definitely there. But it just makes me wonder how soon on from this did they think we need to get some kind of controls in place for this outdoor shooting. Obviously, silent films, it didn't make any difference because people couldn't be heard anyway, so they could hide them behind the cameras. But as Stan and Babe became more and more famous and had such a following, they must have attracted crowds to watch them film.
Yes, they did, and they had to introduce some sort of control. I don't know really anything about it, but I know that it became an issue, and so they did become more control on location after when they were on location. Most of the locations were fairly safe because, of course, if they're in Culver City, they were used to them. all that sort of thing happening.
Yeah, true.
You always tended to see passers-by stopping and looking, but it wasn't much of a problem. So it was between there and the Roach backlot, which was a controlled environment. So
yeah.
not
Because there was
that-
a little bit in birthmarks. I always remember there's reputedly people shouting, goodbye to Ollie and Stan as they board that train.
It's not.
No, it
No,
isn't.
it's not goodbye, Stan, goodbye. Ollie. It certainly wouldn't be Ollie because he wasn't being called Ollie in the pictures at that point. They wouldn't have known about his name.
Yeah.
That was one of the things I was going to talk about with you. Had we done the birthmarks thing together?
Yeah.
I had some notes on that, none of which are in front of me, hopefully. But I think I'd worked out what the names probably were, and I think it wasn't Ollie. I think it was Maury.
Yeah, something like that, isn't it? Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah, and Stan wasn't Stan; it was something else. But
yeah.
So,
but you can still see onlookers in the background when they're at the Santa Fe station as well, can't you? You can see people stopping and looking.
Oh yes.
But it kind of gets away with it because obviously you've got two guys falling over and some guy falling over a suitcase, so you would stand and look at it if it was happening. So
that's it. It would attract attention. And
yeah.
Similarly, the audio content of Men of War with people onlookers apparently laughing. Well, when Pete Gordon goes in the drink on his bicycle, you can hear people laughing. Well, they would, wouldn't they?
You would, yeah, absolutely, you would.
Naughty, naughty. Naughty, naughty.
Yeah, I always thought it was a perfectly natural response. So there's no problem with that.
Yeah, definitely.
I suppose we should talk about the location.
Absolutely. Of course we should.
Yeah, we said a lot about what's happened at the location, but not about the location itself.
Yes, Hollenbeck Park.
Hollenbeck Park, yes, a lovely place within apparently not such a great area. Even at the time, it's had mixed fortunes, I understand, but it was certainly popular with filmmakers, including those from the Roach Studio. I'd recognised it as being the same place that Harold Lloyd had used in Haunted Spooks, which came out in the 1920, having begun in 1919. We know the reason for the delay on that, unfortunately.
Yes.
But I recognised that, and I decided to check up a bit, and I shouldn't have been surprised, really. John Bengtson, a friend of mine, a lovely man, who is he is the expert on tracing film locations, and it must extraordinary eye, and really, he's marvellous at this. And I won't remember all this, but I've got a note here. But he mentions an earlier Harold Lloyd, one of the Lonesome Lukes, called Great While It Lasted, apparently filmed there. Right. Snub Pollard, Run 'em Ragged, and The Butterfly Hunter. Not at Roach this time, but a Ben Turpin Picture Pirates, which is on YouTube, I think. I've got a note of that. Keep meaning to watch the thing. Doopy Morgan, The Heart Snatcher. Larry Seaman, Scamps and Scandals, Hindus and Hazards, which I've got somewhere. And No Wedding Bells, which is also with Oliver Hardy.
Oh, wow, okay.
Yeah. And Returning to Hal Roach, Now Gang, The Old Grey Hoss, which I've got on a Standard 8 Blackhawk print, I think. And Taking Time Away from Echo Park, Echo Lake, there were some keystones done there. Mabel, Fatty and the Law, for one, but there are others. There were one or two other keystones that I thought had been shot there, but it turned out not to have been.
Okay.
But yes, Hollenbeck Park was used quite a lot.
Yes. Yeah. I got a little list here. I think Richard Banrett wrote quite a few in his articles in the Laurel and Hardy magazine about Hollenbeck. Chaplin filmed his trysting place at Hollenbeck Park.
Back to keystones again, yes.
Yeah, Fatty Arbuckle, Fatty's Chance Acquaintance, and Fatty's Tintype Tangle.
Yes.
Ham and Bud, Rival Romeos, Snub Pollard, All Lit Up for Hal Roach. And as you said, Haunted Spooks and Harold Lloyd's Girl Shy as well.
Oh, of course, yes, I meant to mention, yes, he went back there for Girl Shy, yes.
Yeah. And then in 1933, Flirting in the Park, directed by George Stevens for RKO.
Blondes and Redhead series, yes, which was again a kind of a Roach spin-off because, of course, Stevens had left Roach and he'd been working on the Boyfriend series, and the Blondes and Redheads were a kind of continuation of the Boyfriends over at RKO, which I think, as we've discussed previously, tended to become a bit of a home from a home for displaced Roach people. And I love them actually, but and
Yeah,
that's
I haven't seen many of those. I must admit, I'll have to look those out.
yeah.
Give them a watch.
I don't know how many are generally available now. They were among the RKO shorts that the Beeb dusted off in great numbers around end of the 80s, beginning of the 90s.
Right.
And they were putting them on in various slots. Sometimes like a Friday tea time, but very often in those weekday early morning slots when hardly anybody saw them.
Yeah, yeah.
So and there were several of the blondes and redheads there. Grady Sutton's in them.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah, and Carol Tevis, who was Stan's female voice in Twice Two, she's one of the
Oh,
leads.
really?
Yeah, and who else? There were two girls. The other one was June Brewster, who left. She was trying out new features, and who took over? But Dorothy Granger.
Oh, wow, there we go.
Yeah, so
Dorothy Granger.
Yeah,
Fantastic.
Anyway, that's enough blondes and redheads. Ed.
No, but it's a lovely location for comedies. It has a lovely feel to it when they're filming in the park. I think a very bright and breezy sort of feel to the comedy, which is really nice. Really nice.
Yeah, a really summery look, which is a little earlier on before we started this thing, we were talking about my problems with SAD, and it's the sort of movie I need to watch every now and then.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Get the summer look back.
Yeah. That's right.
Funny thing, this is totally irrelevant, but I remember we haven't said when it was released. It was released on the 29th of June, 1929.
Yeah.
On the 29th of June, 1979, I rather hurried home from work because I wanted to do a 50th anniversary screening of Men of War.
Great.
Got home quickly. It was the first thing I did, laced it up on the projector and ran the thing. And and at that time, it was 50 years old. It seemed, fairly old, fairly distant, but that was 45 years ago.
That's not much at all, really, is it?
It's nearly twice as old as it was then.
Mm.
And somehow, I don't think we see the films from 50 years ago now in quite the same way as we saw the films of 50 years ago then.
Yes.
There's a distance.
Yeah.
A distance that we don't have now, I think.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
But, I think you're right there. I mean, I always say these films they do seem timeless. When you look at, as you say, when you look at 50-year-old films that were made from today, they look very dated and very, I don't know, very of their time. But I think the Laurel and Hardy films, they don't feel like old films to me. I don't know what it is about them. They just have a very timeless quality.
Well, they have a timeless appeal. They're fresh, but they obviously look like when they were made. You can't mistake Men of War for something that was made 10, 20, 30 years later. It is very obviously made around 1929, but it's fresh. What I was thinking was that the film made circa 1980 really doesn't look like an historical document. It still looks like a modern world to us.
Yeah.
But whether they have the same amount of freshness and appeal is another matter. And very often, I don't think they have.
No, I think they have to be exceptional films to have that, don't they?
Yeah. So I think they look more modern, but they don't seem as immediate to us. Yeah. That's the odd thing. They don't have the same appeal. So it's a sort of a sliding scale. Really.
Yeah. I also just wanted to pick up on something that's missing from the film. Really, is a lack of music.
Oh yes. Now, thereby hangs a tale, more than one tale, as it turns out. The wonderful people at Film Classics, of course, did a terrible thing to it as regards music. And I'm thinking not incidental music, which is what obviously that you were talking about. But made an end. Because presumably when they were putting it out again in the 40s, the original music wasn't available in the materials, I can only assume. But of course they messed up the remade main title, called it Man of War. And we saw it under that title for years. They'd obviously confused it with the racehorse of the name. And I think actually Men of War was a play on Man of War, the famous 20s racehorse.
Right, okay.
Yeah, obviously a nautical reference, but the only reason it might have had any, topicality or impact would have been through Manowar. And maybe
Yeah.
the person at Film Classics who messed up the title was thinking of the racehorse rather than the nautical connotations.
Yeah.
But anyway, they didn't believe in plurals, hence chicken come home. But anyway, they didn't have the title music, presumably, and some idiot decided to lift and dub on the main and end music from Busybodies,
All right, yeah.
complete with the circular saw effect. So you've got it going across the opening music for a film that has nothing to do with circular saws, and you do wonder what on earth they were thinking of. And that was what kicked around for years. And of course, as you said, there's no incidental score because sometimes they didn't. Perfect Day has no incidental score in the original copies. Unaccustomed as we are, no incidental score. So they weren't always doing it, but some Roach talkies were using some incidental music that they'd been lifting from the music effects tracks from the silence, because they didn't have any commissioned scores as yet for that purpose.
Yes, that's
But
right.
they could just easily be without any music. And for years, all that circulated was this appalling Film Classics print of Man o' War with the Busybodies music. And that's almost certainly why it wasn't shown on television, at least in this country, until that screening I mentioned in 1972.
Oh, okay.
And they didn't show it until they had improved it. The BBC made up a newly mixed soundtrack for it, done, I believe, by a BBC film editor called David Wyatt.
That name sounds familiar.
Yeah, thought it might ring a bell or two.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think
great.
I believe it was David who did it. And what he did, he took a nice clean recording of the Cuckoo theme, I think possibly from Be Big, put that under the main titles. And at one point, at the beginning of the soda scene, you can hear the tune Here We Go
Right.
running under, which I think came off the main titles of Any Old Port.
Yeah.
But most of it was a contemporary bit of library music, a rather clarinet and sousaphone-led thing. I don't know the name of it. But by an odd coincidence or not, Walton Films, around the same time, put out an 8mm compilation called Laurel and Hardy's Musical Moments. And they used that music for that, the same bit of library music. And so I think when I first heard it under Men of War, I thought, I know this music.
You got a good ear.
Well, yes, so I won't do the gag about that, but it's the very macabre joke that's what we were talking about earlier. But no, it was fairly ubiquitous actually, because I remember it also being used on some cheaply made local TV commercials for a temp agency.
Of course.
Yeah.
What else?
Yeah, exactly. So it's obviously an easily accessible bit of library music from the time that you could use without any issues. And so that kind of drove it. And in the latter part of the film, there's a kind of, again, modern sounding for the time, a kind of bit like a Sousa March type of theme.
Yeah.
And that also gave a bit of end title music as it came to crescendo at the end. Although there was still a fragment of the Busybodies play out left in it, because you hear momentarily, so it didn't quite work, but it was not bad. But yeah, they put this music on, and they'd also added extra ambient park effects. You could hear birds tweeting and general things going on. So this was the complete remix soundtrack which they used. I remember seeing the actual BBC film cans for their transmission prints of the Laurel and Hardys, mostly 35mm, some 16, and the one for Camp and Men of War was very heavily stickered to say something like, "Do not use combined optical track, use SEP mag."
Oh, right, okay.
Or something like that, which means it was a separate magnetic soundtrack that had been made up to run in sync on a double band apparatus with the picture. but they were obviously very keen not for the film not to be transmitted with the soundtrack that came with the print, as it was. They knew it was no good.
Yes.
Apart from all the other faults, that it keeps going silent. No, and of course the original music on the main titles was a hit. Well, it was a recent-ish hit called "Running Wild." It was actually from 1922, but it was still being recorded by popular artists up until that time. People know the song now from Marilyn Monroe singing it in "Some Like It Hot," because it was a period song revived for that movie. But it was recorded by quite a few people at that time, and it was also used on some other Roach pictures. And this was the Langdon thing I was talking about. It was actually reused, or yeah, I think the Laurel and Hardy at first. It was reused as the opening music on at least 3 of Langdon's sound shorts at Hal Roach.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, same recording. So that's the connection.
Right.
A very tenuous one with the Langdons.
Good.
But it was missing for years. And I remember hearing or reading quite some time ago that they said that they discovered an original disc from Men of War Reel 1. The problem being was that it was somewhat damaged, apparently, on the outer edge. And you might think, oh, that's the very bit we want, the music.
Yeah.
But they started in the center. So the damaged bit wouldn't really matter that much because we had that audio anyway. And it meant that the opening music from the start wouldn't be affected.
Right, okay.
Yeah. So whether the restored copies we get today draw the track from that disc, I have no idea. But that was one I remember being really like having turned up. So
Yeah.
yeah. But that's the original music, and I did have a note as to who wrote it. I can't remember. So yes, "Running Wild," which was composed in 1922 by Arthur Harrington Gibbs, with lyrics which, of course, we don't hear on the soundtrack by Joe Gray and Leo Wood. That BBC soundtrack actually was used on back to Walton films. Walton, for many years, only put it out as a mute one-reeler.
All right.
Which was eventually, this happened with a few of theirs actually, which was eventually deleted. And later on, they put out a 2-reel sound print on Super 8. And guess what? It had the BBC track.
Dave Wyatt's track.
Dave Wyatt's track, yeah. Yeah. Just thought I'd mention it. And so it gives us a clue, really, as to perhaps where the materials might have been sourced at that time.
Yeah, absolutely. It just, I feel like it's one of those films that really would benefit from a bit of Leroy Shield in the background. It has that sort of jaunty, airy, light, sunny feel to it. That some of the later comedies, like Busybodies, I guess, when they're driving down the street, or I don't know. But it just feels like it would benefit from a little bit of back, and it would also help with that cutaway scenes where it goes from noisy to silent.
Yes, it would mask a lot of the poor sound editing if it had a good track under it. And Stan Laurel at least knew that the incidental music helped pace the action. I know later on he was specifically asking Marvin Hatley to give him something right for the action to help it along, and then they knew the value of it. And when you see some of the later sound shots where after it had become customary to have a score, they dispense with it. You really do notice the absence. Some of them, really do feel like they're dragging a bit. Twice 2 does.
Yeah, they certainly help to move it along, don't they? I was just trying to think if when do they start actually using wall-to-wall music?
I don't think it starts until Blotto.
Right. So it's probably, wow. Is it that late? Is it Blotto?
Yeah, yeah, I think so. Night Owls hasn't, and that urban that was immediately preceding Blotto, and that was shot at the end of 29. And we know what the original score was. It's not what we hear today, of course. That's the reissue score, but there was a continuing score all under Blotto. We don't get the Leroy Shield scores as we know them until Another Fine Mess, but rather later on into 1930.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's probably like a. Would I say like a mentality thing, or almost they haven't realised just how important that would be? I think it might have been Richard Band made a comment once where they were saying people would think, "Where's the music coming from? What's the point of the music?" And in the sound films, where is it coming from? Where is this orchestra? It kind of makes sense, I suppose.
It was a thing in early talkies. I'm trying to think which film this was about, but there was this idea that an incidental score was an incongruity because people would say, "Where's the music coming from?" But I don't know. I've seen a number of talkie features from 29 that do have that, and nobody seems to question
Right.
it.
Okay.
But no, there was one I think where somebody involved with the film saying, "Look, we have to show the orchestra playing, otherwise people will say, where's it coming from?" And they forgot, and they forgot to include the cutaway to the orchestra, and nobody cared anyway.
Because there is the bandstand scene right at the start as well, which I think that would have given the perfect explanation as to where this music was coming from. Because it starts with the bandstand and drifts away, doesn't it?
Well, that's the thing, and of course, the film classics print just has them playing silently. There's nothing under there, whereas the opening Running Wild music was intended to continue running under the bandstand scenes. We were meant to assume that was them playing. Um, Prior to the original track becoming available, actually the Michael Agee version of Men of War got around it rather nicely, and this is the version that was colorized, as I remember. The way he did it, he lifted the opening music from One Good Turn, Cuckoo and The Moon and You, had that running under the titles and under the band scenes at the beginning. And it actually, and in lieu of the original being available, it worked very well. So, I think that was a good interim solution. But of course, once you got the original back, that was preferable.
Let's orchestrate here. It's nice and warm.
That's a very good idea.
Brilliant. Well, we're moving along rather nicely, running wild as elves. So, just what I'd like to just try and do is consider the sort of the Lewis R. Foster canon. How impactful do you think that was? That sort of, because that was a very important period for the boys. That transition from silence to talkies. It finished very strongly, and I think those three early talkies, those first three talkies, really kind of set them on the right trajectory. As you say, Perfect Day again gets it even better. It was Men of War was sort of third time lucky. They had the Unaccustomed as We Are, which was very verbal, a lot of dialogue going on. Started very heavy, but then in the second reel it sort of drifted away to more physical action, and then Birthmarks was almost a reversion back to silence, pretty much, with a little bit of dialogue. But I think Men of War was sort of third time lucky in terms of the dialogue and how much was used. I don't know how you feel about that.
Yeah, I do think they got the balance right. That was the first time they did. Yeah, they went from too much all talking to practically reverting to silence. And then, yeah, the balance was about right. There's plenty of good visual, plenty of good dialogue. And apart from the technical limitations, it works very well indeed. And to some extent, there's pretty much the template for the way they were to work afterwards. There's obviously exceptions. Night Owls, for example, is predominantly visual. Whereas Blotto wouldn't have, anything like the impact if it wasn't for the dialogue.
Yes, yeah, that's true. What do you think about the the end scene, the finale on the water? How do you think that? Because obviously it's a bit in the mould of the silent shorts, where it's kind of building up to a reciprocal destruction type ending. How do you think that works? Do you think it's a strong ending or a?
No, I don't think it builds so much as clutters, rather than as the boat does. It's trying to,
Yeah.
but I just don't think that I just don't think it comes off the confines of the boat really work against the idea of a building battle.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It does, definitely does. Is this
Yeah,
probably one of the last times they used that device? Do you think? I'm trying to think of other ones after this.
Well, the last big battle of 29 was the rice fight in the Hooskow.
Yes, yeah, that's true. Yeah, they used it again,
Which
didn't they?
Yeah, which had been held over from previous film, I think. I'm trying to remember which one now, but and either way, yeah. I mean that was the last of those big, everybody drawn in.
Bacon grabbers, wasn't it? Bacon grabbers was going to use the gag, wasn't it?
The rice in the radiator business was going to be in bacon grabbers. Yeah,
yeah, that's right.
But yeah, I think that that type of battle. This was the last one. Hooskow was the last throw of the dice with that, I think.
Yeah, they stretched it out pretty well, didn't they?
Oh God, they got plenty of mileage out of that,
Yeah.
And but yes, they were clearly trying to do something that wasn't a remake of Two Tars, but a revisiting of it.
Yeah, yeah.
And didn't Dick Band quote Foster to that effect, that it was an economy thing? They were starting to rework ideas more, but they didn't set out to remake Two Tars, but to just try to do something similar to it.
Yes, that's right. Yes, he did say that. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, which is about right. And of course, we do know that really from the time the sound shorts got established, they were more and more geared to remakes, reworkings of specific routines and so on. So I think this is where that cycle begins. And it's not a bad thing, because they had this pleasant habit of doing it even better next time around.
And I think that sort of that kind of adds weight to the argument that the talkies are better than the silence. I guess their voices add so much more to the characters. People may like some people might like the silence more, and that's absolutely fine. But I think there is so much that their voices and the dialogue does bring to the comedies. I think is undeniable, really.
Oh, there's an extra dimension there, and it does make a difference. And like I said, they tended to do it better. Laughing Gravy is much better than Angora Love.
Yeah.
Good though it is, and more original as it is, Laughing Gravy is a far better film than Angora Love, in my opinion.
Yeah, yeah. I know some will disagree with that. I know some people but that's fine.
They'll be queuing up to disagree with me, I don't think.
You wait. You just wait now. the fallout on social media.
Yeah, if it's of any help, I don't think the chimp is better.
Oh, okay. Oh, I like the chimp. I like the chimp. You see, there we go, straight away.
What's it? I like the chimp as well. I just don't think it's better than Angora Love.
Yes. I know what you mean. Another fine mess and duck soup. I think the voices give so much more to that.
Yeah, I mean, it brings a whole new dimension to it. Of course, they were more settled in their mature teamwork by then, anyway.
Yeah.
But it's from a stage sketch in the first place, so it's going to benefit from dialogue.
Yeah, definitely.
So definitely. Even if Stan's dad didn't like the American aspect they gave him.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Good old AJ. Excellent. Wonderful. So, well, I think our shore leave is coming to an end, Glenn. I think we're getting to the end of my notes. Do you have anything else on your notes?
Probably nothing of great consequence. I'm having a very quick skim here. I think we said it all, actually. But there was the only thing I've got here. Back to the Bloomers routine, and the line about they fall down.
Yes.
Another example of that baby talk fad in America at the time, which gave us the title "We Fall Down."
Oh, it's a fad, was it?
Oh yeah, it was a thing. It was a popular song. I fall down and go boom, or something like that, which was a hit in America at the time.
Here we are with our tin horns, pretty horns, shiny horns. I hope we played these notes before. We fall down and go boom, boom.
wasn't known in Britain, hence We Fall Down becoming We Slip Up for British audiences.
Yes.
But you hear it again in the Hollywood Review sketch, you know, I fall down, go plop.
I see what you mean. Yeah, very babish. And because Babe obviously says in what does he say? It flipped in one of the is that one of the silence? It flipped.
Yeah, it is. And oh gosh, I'm trying to think now. It flipped. Yes, it's oh crumbs. It's in one of the two. It's either Angora Love or Bacon Grabbers, and it's got. I know this because I can hear the organ track in my head, unfortunately, because it's not.
Yeah. He's saying it to somebody in a position of power above him, isn't it? It's flipped, yeah. And also the in Double Whoopee, it blewed with his little whistle. That's another bit of baby talk, isn't it?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. That's it. Was a thing in America at the time, and. But actually, now we're back to Marilyn Monroe and Some Like It Hot, because, of course, that was another song revived in that was I Want to Be Loved by You with this boop boop badoop stuff.
Oh, right, okay, of course.
And all that was very much in the baby talk mode.
Yeah.
So, you know,
thank God that fad came to an end, because it's annoying. I shall banish that to Bogeyland. Baby talk into Bogeyland straight away.
Yeah. I tell you what, the Betty Boop fans would never forgive you for that.
Yeah, of course.
You know, I'm going to get complaints from the Angora Love fans. You're going to get them from the Betty Boop brigade.
Bring it on. I'm used to getting criticised now. It's fine. There's no problem. Brilliant.
Oh yes, we've got the mental scar tissue. Don't worry about it.
Oh yes, we're tough enough for it now. We're big and ugly enough for it now. Brilliant, Glenn. thanks ever so much. I always love chatting with you about these films, because it's great to share love and passion for these films that I've grown up with, and you've obviously grown up with as well. So thank you so much for joining us again.
Thanks, Patrick. I really enjoyed it too. I get quite a laugh out of these.
It's good stuff. It's really good stuff.
I hope other people do.
We'll see. I'm sure they'll tell us if they don't.
I'm sure they will.
No, thanks ever so much, Glenn, and hopefully it won't be too long before we see you again.
Yeah, looking forward to it. And are you going to give me a hint as to when I'm next likely to be brought in, which film, or is that still in the planning?
That would indicate that I plan these things ahead of time, and I'm not that advanced, I'm afraid. But
well, that would not be fair of me to assume, because I don't plan either. So this is.
But I'll
quite off the cuff, but no close to it.
I'll give you 24 hours notice, like I usually do.
Good, I've got enough time to catch up on sleep.
That's it, exactly.
Only just.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Glenn. Look after yourself, and we'll see you again soon.
Yes, indeed. See you soon. Bye for now.
So there we are. Our soda's drunk, our boat is submerged, and we're left more than a little wet behind the ears. I hope you've enjoyed our little sailor's holiday. Do get in touch and let me know your thoughts on today's episode. I'd love to hear from you. Next time, we'll be taking a look at Stan and Ollie's first appearance in a feature film, being their cameo in the Hollywood Review of 1929. So don't forget to check out the podcast show notes for links to become a patron of the show. Also, to go and check out Andreas and Michael's new book, Laurel and Hardy, A True Love Story, or to subscribe to our Laurel and Hardy magazine. Our current issue is all about the music box, which is quite appropriate actually, as just this week a new sign was unveiled at the foot of the steps declaring the site to be a cultural historical landmark, which is fabulous. So subscribe today and you'll receive our music box issue through the post as your first of 2 subscriber issues for the year. So that's all for today. All that's left to do now is to say thank you to today's guest, the brilliant Glenn Mitchell. Thank you as usual to the Bohunks Orchestra and Basta Music. And last but by no means least, thank you for choosing to spend another hour and a half or so with me in my company. And until next time, it's goodbye from him.
Goodbye.
Goodbye from him.
Goodbye.
And a very goodbye from me. Goodbye.